Good afternoon, everyone. That's just the right side of the table. So, good afternoon to the left side of the table. Because I believe, we need to be inclusive. But I heard Vashti after lunch saying that she had the most difficult time slot. And I believe I have one up to you because I am the only thing standing, well, beside the wrap-up, standing between you and Barbados. For those of us who enjoy what Barbados has to offer, I will just leave it there, not to protect the innocent. So as the presentation goes up, as was said, my name is Anselm Charles. I am the ICT manager at CARICOM IMPACS. And usually when I'm doing this presentation, it is along the lines of cyber and what's going on in the region and all the infiltrations and etc. And when I was asked to do this, I was told we need to focus on the legal frameworks because how do we build, the Computer Misuse Acts and those cybercrime acts, how do we use those things and why are they important as we move towards expanding the digital economy within the region? Still waiting for the presentation. I'm told I can't finish. Does this count against my time? I'm curious. I need to stop. But I mean, I could begin without my presentation. It makes, so just to start it off, for those of you who may or may not know, CARICOM IMPACS actually stands for, and we have a thing in the region for long names, so bear with me, the Caribbean Community Implementation Agency for Crime and Security. This is why we just call it CARICOM IMPACS, or for short, IMPACS. It was established in 2006 out of a heads of government meeting, which coincidentally there's one this week in the Bahamas. And our mandate is basically the crime and security agenda within the region. So we focus on intelligence, support to our member states. We have 15 member states and 5 associate states. So we support them in intelligence operations, border security operations, and of 2017, cybersecurity and cybercrime was added to that list. We are a triad agency, meaning that we have a head office or HQ. It's based in Trinidad and Tobago. And then we have 2 sub-agencies, one specifically for intelligence, which is the Regional Intelligence Fusion Center, and the other one being the one here in Barbados, which is a Joint Regional Communications Center. The one in Trinidad and Tobago, RIFC, is responsible for intelligence, and the one in Barbados here, we do border services out of it. And here is my presentation. So we skip that, we talk about that. Let's talk about the digital economy. One of the presenters earlier stated that there wasn't a specific definition for digital economy, which is true, just like cyber. There is no specific definition, but I've condensed it down for the purposes of this presentation to refer to the use of information technology to create or adapt, market or consume goods and services. Simplistic, one sentence. And I think that covers what the digital economy is. And there are some benefits to a digital economy. You have infrastructure, you have e-business, you have e-commerce. But there is one thing that if you don't have, none of this will work. And anybody could tell me what that is. One key entity, what that is. Don't make me call names. I know a lot of you in the room. I know a lot of you without the name tags in the room. So one thing, anybody want to take a shot at it? What's that, sorry? Telecom. People. Who said it? People. right? Somebody said it. So people, if we don't have people, then we can have all the legislation we to cover, we can have all the infrastructure, we can have, you know, these wonderful platforms and, you know, trade and all these things. But if we don't have people, then it's all for naught. But more importantly, we have the people, but the people have to trust the platform. They have to trust it. And as a ICT professional, and I'm sure some of you share the same sentiments, people are always very skeptical because, quite frankly, Netflix is a thing and they portray us in very bad light. I've never seen a movie where the ICT person isn't doing something nefarious. Right? It started off Jurassic Park. They had this big park with dinosaurs and one IT person, and then it went downhill from there. Right? So, and it reflects globally. Right? So we're going to focus on the light green line, and this is the Edelman Trust Barometer. And they did a survey, and they asked a simple question, you know, do you have trust in the ICT sector? Right? They did it both globally and in the US. And it started off at 77%, all right? And it ended up at 68%. That's globally. But even worse is where the US populace started, and, you know, 78%, and it's all the way below 58%, which tells you this graph should be the other way around, because with COVID and, you know, the move to this whole digital, we should be trusting the system more. But why aren't we trusting the system? Why do we inherently think that the system is out to get us, right? And it's very simple, right? I like to break things down very simply. We just need three things. Right? One, legislation is what we're going to cover today. So we're going to into a little more detail in that. You have two, you have accountability, which comes with legislation, but it basically tells the people, listen, if it goes wrong, and it usually will at some point, nobody is perfect, who do we hold accountable? What redress do we have? Right? And of course, you build that into legislation. And then you have sensitization. You educate the people, right? And when educating, you have to understand that not everyone is at the same level. So you then need to craft your education campaigns or your sensitization campaigns to ensure that you reach each and every demographic, because you can't just say that these digital services and this, by extension, this entire economy is only for a specific age group, 18 to 24, just pulling something out of my head. Because you would have those that are younger than that age group, and you have those that are older than in that age group, and you want to be able to reach those individuals. So, as I said before this presentation, we're more focusing on legislation, because without legislation, we can't really build that trust, because we can't regulate, we can't do anything without the legislation. It's just a free-for-all. So the simplistic question is, why legislation? And why do we need legislation? And I'm focusing here on cybercrime, because cybercrime legislation is, and I just want to make it known that this is not necessarily one particular piece of legislation. This could be a number of pieces of legislation that allows you to detect and prosecute cybercrime, which is usually the crime that comes out of any digital sphere or environment. So we have, of course, the borderless nature of cybercrime. As was mentioned many times today, and I'll just re-emphasize, most of the products and services within the region do not exist in one geographic location. So we need some sort of legislation to be able to police that borderless space, which is at some points the wild, wild west, to ensure that we create the notion that, listen, this is a secure space to our people. Remember, we're dealing with people, right? We have, of course, anonymity. You don't know who's on the other side of your computer screen. It may be no one. It may be an algorithm. It may be another computer. You don't know. So you need to ensure that that's also incorporated. Again, key area, you need to build trust. People are more going to be engaging with something digital if they know that there are safeguards behind it. And we want to increase participation, because when we increase participation, we then expand. And the only way to do that is the people need to trust us. And the only way to build that trust is to ensure and tell the people, listen, there is this new thing that we're pushing, these digital services, but these are the restrictions, these are the safeguards. And if it does go wrong, these are the, this is what is going to happen. We're going to prosecute, we're going to investigate, we're going to compensate. This is where your compensation is going to come from. This is what your compensation is going to be, and so forth and so forth. The last one here, and the second to last one, and to enhance cyber resilience and enhance DIP. DIP is simply detection, investigation, and prosecution. Because we tend to forget that piece of the legislation, because we also need to give our national enforcement, whatever that enforcement looks like, the tools and teeth needed to help detect, investigate, and prosecute. So what does legislation or good legislation look like? And I will make the notion now that, one, I am not a lawyer, right? But, and two, this may not be specific to everyone's application. This is general. Because with cyber is specific to an operating area. So while we do push for some sort of model legislation, there are times where where that harmonized legislation may have to be tweaked to specific situations that may be happening within a specific country. So the first thing we want to look at is what I have labeled as the 3 C's. Anybody want to take a stab of what the 3 C's are? Three C's. First C. What's the first C? No. Close though. Not as close. So the first C, the 3 C's deals with computers. So it's the 3 C's are basically where the computer is an accessory to a crime, where the computer is used as a weapon, and where the computer is a proxy to attack something else that's connected to that computer. Those are the 3 C's, right? The second one is you want to ensure that you have some provision for crimes against people, right? And what do I mean by crimes against people? I mean things like cyber stalking, online grooming, identity theft, human trafficking, financial fraud, and the list could go on and on and on and on, right? So it's crimes where the specific targets are people, but through a network device. So the next part is crimes against property. So you have things like cyber vandalism. I had a little tight on, my apologies. Cyber vandalism, yes, right? So things like website defacement, those sorts of things which we have a good bit of in our region. Distributed denial of service attacks, which for the non-technical in the room, it means that you have a malicious actor taking over a large amount of computers and then telling those computers to send requests to this one particular system. And this one particular system is overwhelmed and just dies. all right? So that's why, and then of course, transfer of harmful programs, so things like ransomware, et cetera, right? Now, you want to ensure that you have provisions for that. I like to ask questions in my presentation. So we learned what the 3 C's are. We learned what crimes against people are. We learned what crimes against property. So then what's crimes against institution? Reputation, but is that people somewhat? Reputation? My timekeeper going for the sheet, so we need to run quickly. So crimes against institution. What's that? National infrastructure. That's correct. So national infrastructure, things like cyber warfare, those sorts of things. And you want to put that again as crimes against institution. Next one is technical definitions. We all know the importance of the meaning of a word, more so in law, because the definition, for example, of a computer, if it doesn't include things like mobile devices, tablets, those sorts of things, then you would leave a lot of loopholes in your legislation. And you don't want to leave those loopholes. Now, it is very difficult for law, because of the process we have in the region, to go from thought to actual proclaimed law. That's a lengthy process. So it's not uncommon for legislation to lag behind technology, because technology doesn't have that holdback. However, you can think slightly forward, right? If you see something on the horizon, how does this fit in? Would it fit into my definitions? Is it specific? Is it wider? Those sorts of conversations and focal points you would need to do. International cooperation. Now, I've lumped things like criminal duplicity, your mutual legal exchange, all those kind of things in here. But what you want to do is ensure that in your legislation, it not necessarily mirrors somebody else's legislation, but your crimes are the same, right? Because that helps, as I said before, because our products and services are not within the region, we do have to go out of the region most times to get information, and you want to be ensuring that whoever you're asking has the same laws on their books and categorized the same way. And of course, last but not least, enforcement. Right? You need to have provisions within your legislation that gives the tools necessary to detect, investigate, and prosecute within your local jurisdiction. So the regional, at the regional level, what we have done in 2016, we sat down with our partners. 2 of them are here today, CTU and the Commonwealth Secretariat. And we came up with this document, which was approved the year after by heads of government, which is the Cybersecurity and Cybercrime Action Plan. And within that plan, there are 5 priority areas that we focus activities under, and the framework under. So the 5 areas being public awareness, building sustainable capacity, technical standards and infrastructure, legal environment, and regional and international cooperation. And under the legal environment pillar, we have done 2 things at the regional level. So we have done a desk review of existing national legislation and policy frameworks within the member states, and comparing those against regional and the regional international standards. And we've also done regional cybercrime policy and legislative guidance documents to be developed. So to preempt the question that will follow is the reason we have not gone all the way to model law is because what we want to do is work directly with member states to see based on what they have on the books now, and to see how we can implement legislation that would, for now, cover the main areas and then make future plans. And what do I mean by that? In most of our jurisdictions, there is a Computer Misuse Act, and to make the fundamental changes or to bring new legislation into it, we would not, sometimes it may be tricky. So instead of trying to delay and get the best of both worlds, we are working to see what we can do now and then plan for the future. And how we're doing that is that we're working with the Council of Europe to hold country-specific workshops on building criminal justice capacities and on cybercrime, electronic evidence, and ascension to the Budapest Convention. Now, the Budapest Convention just recently has a new schedule, and what it does, it's an international framework by which countries can measure up their legislation to ensure that they cover those key areas. It also brings substantive technical assistance to member states, both in the ratification process, which is a 5-year process, and then the post-ratification process. So we are working directly with countries to bring that about. And that brings me to the end of my presentation. I think my timekeeper, I am in time. I didn't get back the time I lost in the start, but that's another discussion. So I want to thank you for the short time that we spent together going through this. But the only thing I want to leave you with, if you remember nothing else I've said, is that remember the most important thing when we are going about developing our digital economies and all the auxiliary processes that come with it, is that the people, if the people do not trust what you're doing, we are doomed to fail. Thank you very much.
Thank you very, very much in outlining that we are the cause of our own destruction. So on that note, I do see across the room that we have a few hands up. If I can start with the Secretary General and I can go across the room. I'm sure, thankfully, we now all have time to field the questions and close off on time today.
Yes, thank you very much, Anselm, for keeping us on track. And thanks for the very good presentation. CTU works closely with CARICOM IMPACS because we, of course, as he's rightfully said, the cybersecurity, if there's no trust and confidence, then people aren't actually going to use the systems. IMPACS, which you didn't mention, is sort of an institution coming out of the Legacy of Cricket World Cup, which we hosted successfully in the region in 2007. And it is one of the mechanisms that remain to this day that I think successfully provides for the sharing of information across border, because we understand the importance of security, beyond even cybersecurity, security of the CARICOM space. But I wanted to know if, I'm not fully aware of what legislation at the national level enables IMPACS to share that information. I know it's obviously sensitive information in criminal intelligence and so on, but how are countries able to share that information under what specific legislative frameworks? And secondly, I'll just mention on the Cybercrime Action Plan, while it is a good one, I think unfortunately, and we were involved too in developing it, is the funds really to implement that. I think is something that CARICOM heads need to look at. As with all things, we have plans, but the actual financial resources to implement it is lacking. So that's the only unfortunate thing I would say about the plan, and we welcome our development partners like the ITU and others to help us in terms of assistance in moving that plan forward. Thank you.
I just want to just to respond to your two questions. I'll do the second one first. So I agree with you. The funds is always the issue, and we do have regional and international partners that do work along with us to implement activities under those priority areas. What I think is worth mentioning is that we are currently, now this plan was written in 2016, so it is a bit dated at this point, and we have started the initial process of reviewing that and then working together with again, our partners to, update the plan. So that is a work in progress. On the first question, and I didn't want to go too much into the sensitization aspect, but what allows the member states to share information through the agency is that we have a number of MOUs and MOIs and signed text or agreements between each member state and the agency that specifically dictates how we share that information, what we do with that information, and it governs our operations. So you have the intergovernmental agreement that would have established the agency that in 2006, and then subsequent to that, you have the MOUs and MOIs between the territories and the agency, as well as some of our partners that must be executed before we are able to share. And then because each member state is a sovereign state, there are additional safeguards, instructions that come under the scope of the SOPs that would determine how we share that information. So sometimes we would receive information and be told specifically what to do with that information. But we own none of the data. All our data is owned by the specific member states, and we serve those member states to basically assist in their operations, whether it be border services, intelligence, or cyber.
Excellent. Can I hand over to the Secretary General? I think I'm going between my Secretary Generals at this point of the ICC, who also has a question for you, Anselm, before you go to the left. Chris, your questions.
All right. Just a quick question. What do you make of, are you following the UN Cybercrime Convention? It's due to be completed in 2024. From an industry perspective, we've got massive concerns about the scope of that convention. I'd just be really interested to know, one, if anybody's aware of it, and two, are you involved in it, or do you have any particular worries yourself?
Right, so yes, we are involved in it. As I said, we support our member states, and because our member states are involved, we then provide the necessary support that they require. So we are involved with it. I think it's a little bit remiss of me to comment on it at this point. It's a conversation we could probably have over the cocktails. However, I would say that the agency's position is not one or the other, all right, at this point. It's not mutually exclusive. If you go with the Budapest Convention, it does not mean if and when the UN process finishes that you can't sign on to that as well. But because the Budapest Convention is the established framework at this point, it, from a benefit perspective to our member states, we say, listen, let's work with this. We know that you have discussions with the UN Convention. We will support you in those discussions. And when that completes its course, then we can evaluate and help you along those lines as well. So it's not that we prefer one or the other. It's just that this is what we have now. We know what we need to do now. So we're using what we have now instead of waiting to the future.
Just to point out, I know that several CARICOM countries are involved in the OWEG process, and it's an iterative one. And we are involved in the consultation process because we see it as not being mutually exclusive, but ultimately complementary, because they aim to achieve the same objectives, which is to create that global cybersecurity agreement or impact across the globe. But as Anselm had indicated, we're not in the nascent phases, but we're getting there, but that process will take time. I'm going to, before I go across the room, because I see some hands raised, if I could just put forward to you one of the questions raised by an online participant. Anselm, can you say whether there exists or is being developed by CARICOM IMPACS any regional guidelines or protocols to address the areas of technical, legal, and political responses for CARICOM member states regarding cyber diplomacy. That is, for cybersecurity breaches from states' jurisdictions external to CARICOM region, whether the state directly or entities, bodies sponsored or supported by a state.
That's a hard question. So the answer is yes. We are working. So it's part of, so we do have, as I said, policy and guidance documents as it relates to legislation. But on the flip side of that, we are starting to look at that. It's a work in progress. What we want to do is do it from a regional level. Currently, we're working one-to-one with member states. So when that request comes, we work directly with our member states. But we do have plans within the immediate future to come up with a regional type document that will give a general guidance along those lines, but we do recognize that we would still have to work one-on-one with states because of specific instances or specific nuances that happen within our region.
All right, I can finally hand over to the gentleman at the back who has a question as well.
Rodney Payne, Public Sector Modernization Program, Barbados. The building of trust. I have friends who know that I am pushing e-services, and even though I'm telling them that it's going to be safe, they're still skeptical because they're hearing the hackers breaking into the businesses and using the data. And then I say B, persons saying that they're being forced to use the technology because they don't want to stand in the long lines. So I have to take this risk in order for me to get my business done. What would you say? What recommendations do you say to these persons for these issues?
I think it goes back to the sensitization and how you sensitize. So one of the things when you're building a sensitization plan is what are the fears of the people? And then you determine how are you going to address those fears. So based on the kind of limited information on your question, I would have a conversation with them and say, okay, what are you afraid of? And then show them the safeguards that, and I'm just using Barbados, that Barbados has to alleviate those fears, be it legislation, be it security in terms of infrastructure. You can have, you can let them talk to other people who within their standings to, get their reactions to the system and then work from there. But sensitization is not just somebody coming up and say, well, the system is secure and it means instead of 10 minutes, you'll now take 2. Because for some people, time is not an issue, right? It is. I remember doing some work with a specific member state, and one of the fears that was raised by a specific demographic was, this is the only time I get to come out of my house and interact with people, when they were launching a specific payment service, right? So you have to sit down and think, okay, how can I alleviate that fear? Do I have a center where I bring these people and they could still interact, but they can use the digital platform instead of doing it from home? You need to be creative. It's not an easy thing, and you will always have the naysayers. You will never convince 100% of the people. But once you have the majority, then you have that hive mentality, because people then say, well, no, why are you still doing this? We could do this quickly, and it makes your job a little easier.
Before we move on, I'm just going to raise one question from our virtual audience. This is from Tracy Hackshaw. Does the region through CTU or IMPACS keep an up-to-date critical infrastructure inventory?
You want to take that? I think So at a regional level, coming out of one of our projects, we have a platform that we intend to do something like that. We have a central resource, of course, adequately secured and permissioned out, and we that is one of the functions, to have this centralized resource where we can track not only critical infrastructure, but skill sets that in the event of something going wrong, to respond or assist within that sector. So, but for now, that platform should launch in a month's time, by the way. But for now, those lists are really held at the member state level. And I will say this, and I'm not throwing shade to any member state, but in some places, we need to work on defining what critical infrastructure is. There are some places that there's no definition for that, whether in principle or legislation. So we are all at different places, but we are hoping with those one-on-one country consultations to get everybody to a common base, and then we work from there. Hope that answers the question. I think it's...
Thank you. I'll just say as well, because he asked about CTU. So the short answer from our perspective is no, and what you said is exactly right. My own experience working with the government of Barbados is that we had initiated a critical infrastructure identification and protection program. So let's start with identifying what is critical infrastructure, and not necessarily to keep inventory of the infrastructure, because it would be a significant, sizable database, but identify the providers of that infrastructure, whether it is the power grid or water, public health care, and so on, and then have regulations around that, governing how they are to protect their own infrastructures, how the power service providers, the telecoms providers, how are they are in fact to keep an inventory of it, do audits, and are subject to cybersecurity tests, penetration testing and that kind of thing, in order to ensure that they are adhering to the regulation. So I think we have to start with actually identifying across the board what that critical, or who are the providers of critical infrastructure, and then have regulations that govern how they are to take care of that infrastructure. Thanks.
And the final question for this afternoon goes to the gentleman at the left.
Hi, my name is Anselm Robinson, and I represent the Ministry of Financial Services of the Cayman Islands. Anselm, sorry, that was a very good presentation.
Thank you.
Now, in your presentation, you showed a slide that reflected trust and how the trust has fallen off. But I believe that some of the distrust, it actually finds its roots in the response to a lot of the legislation that has been implemented to protect the same people. And part of that, I believe, is because some of the supporting legislation is viewed as being invasive, right? Getting into people's own, privacy, etc. What are some of the tools that you would suggest that we can implement to build back that trust? Because if we look, for example, at just an extension of that graph, that really it speaks to people's lack of trust in governments when it really boils down to it. What are some of the tools that you think that can be implemented to rebuild that trust that is so necessary? Because you've mentioned it throughout your entire presentation.
I think so. With any piece of legislation, especially cyber related, or any legislation where to deliver some level of security, the people have to give up something, be it privacy, be it movement, any sort of thing. One of the key things is, and it goes back to sensitization, is sitting down and basically laying bare, listen, this is what we're trying to achieve. All right. So I know in some jurisdictions, part of the drafting process is consultations. However, I think the consultations happen before you start a draft, and then you see this draft appear, and it's sometimes different to what the consultations are, and then you don't go back out and say, okay, this is what we've come up with, comment on this. And for whatever reason, that may be political, otherwise, you need to get this done by X time, etc. But it boils back down to having that conversation with people and understanding that people will make or break any system, any space, because if nobody's using it, if nobody trusts it, then it's all for naught. Yes, we can pass the legislation, but then there's a whole onslaught. So my simple thing is talk, consult, both pre-draft and the post-draft. That's it?
Just one final comment, Anselm, and this would come from the Ministry of the Attorney General, Trinidad and Tobago.
Yes, yes. Okay, thank you very much, Vashti. And to Anselm, that was a very good presentation. It's just in relation to what Chris was asking, if I may. So CARICOM is following very closely to the UN Convention. If you are as well, you would realize that CARICOM, headed by Jamaica has been voted to speak on behalf of us. So our 14 member states are well represented. We have positions on almost every part of the clusters for the fourth session. You may know that the new text was given to the group, I think it was November or December last year. So we're now working with the text, which we did, I think it was mid-January. So three main countries within CARICOM spearheading, and I would say Jamaica is leading, Guyana is co-chair, if I'm getting it right, and then you also have the others who pitch in to give our positions. So right now, if you looked at what happened in the last session, a lot of the stronger countries or bigger countries had stronger positions on like terrorism and so forth. And if it is that the UNTOC or the UNCAC actually takes care of the positions that they want to put in there, CARICOM is very open to further discussions on those items. However, we are methodically going through with the rest of the 193 countries, very methodically as to what our positions would be. There isn't anything final, because in April, we go back to discuss the latter ones that deal with international cooperation, mutual legal assistance, and so forth. But CARICOM is very much so together with IMPACS, following and participating. I actually have a working document I have to give responses to by tonight, so that CARICOM could sit and put forward our positions before April comes up. So again, yeah, we could talk about it at the cocktail, but just to let you know, our eyes are on the convention. Thank you.